Tailwind CSS. It's trending, and there's some drama about it on Twitter. If you're not aware, I made a short about it. I leave a link up there and under the like button. But since it's trending, I figured let's talk about it and let's outline some of its strengths, some of its weaknesses, and help you really make the best decision for your team and for your software skill set. Okay. Before we get into it, I need to acknowledge. Listen, we are living in such a blessed time. We have so many tools to build stuff. Some of them are Tailwind and some of them are, other stuff. And none of them are inherently good or bad, right? It just depends on what we like and what our use case requires, okay? So CSS, awesome. Tailwind, awesome. Chakra UI, awesome. It really just depends on what we want to do and how we like to do things. Now with that, let's get into Tailwind. I want to talk about two strengths, two weaknesses, and one I'm not so sure, okay? To begin with, let's define what Tailwind even is, because a lot of people, I feel like, have expressed confusion about this to me. And off the bat, I want to tell you Tailwind is a CSS generator. It is not a CSS framework. It is not a CSS library. It's not a collection of components. That's Tailwind UI. Tailwind is something where you give it a config file and it generates a long giant CSS file for you, where one class name corresponds to one CSS rule. It's called atomic CSS. So Tailwind, put it this way, is an atomic CSS generator. That's what it is. It takes in a config file, tailwind.config.js, and outputs a massive CSS file with all the class names. You then use these class names in your apps and ship them fast. That's the gist of it, but you might be thinking, oh, but what if I ship this massive CSS file full of class names to my users? You don't. Tailwind uses something called purge CSS to remove all the stuff you don't use and just uses and ships the class names that you do use, okay? This comes with the first strength I want to talk to you about, a huge benefit, and that is you only ship the CSS that your users need, and you only ship it once. Now, I've been a part of tech teams, many of them over the years, where I write CSS, I don't know, by class name, by component. So I'll do .box, and in .box, I'll want to do display flex. Cool. Then I have another class named .card, and in there I have display flex. And so I have this rule, display flex, twice, and I ship those bytes, display flex, twice in two different class names. Over time and scale, this adds up to where you ship the same CSS rule hundreds, thousands of times, and who bears the cost? Not you, the one writing it, your users downloading this redundant CSS. Tailwind ships display flex or display grid or really any rule once, and that saves time. I'll show you this here. I built a little, example with hello with a button that you maybe shouldn't or should click. And in here, I'm using the class name grid, and I have display grid, and this display grid is shipped only one time. That's it. I will never ship display grid again. What that means is I ship actually less CSS because the CSS that's not used is also removed, and what I end up with is a very lean CSS bundle for my users. And so here, if we actually look, let's go to the network and filter on CSS and reload, and what we'll see is for some reason it doesn't even include CSS in this build locally. But if we look at the production build, what we are shipping with Tailwind CSS is about 1-2 kilobytes. By no means is that minuscule, but that's the status. Here it's here size. By no means is that minuscule, 1.9 KB. By no means is that minuscule, but it's still not megabytes, which every CSS rule per class name would be megabytes. So it's removing what's not needed and shipping every declaration, every rule once, which is pretty nice because as we know from web.dev, milliseconds make millions. This is a great article. I'll put a link under the like button. I recommend reading that. So Tailwind will remove the stuff you don't use and ship every rule once. Awesome. That's a massive strength. The second strength is it's an abstraction on CSS, meaning I don't need to think about vendor prefixes. I don't need to think about what is the CSS rule here. No, I just use a class name that sometimes even makes more sense than otherwise. Okay, and that's pretty helpful. So let me show you that here actually. So if we go to the editor, this is what Tailwind looks like. It's a bunch of class names, and you can already see BG gradient to T, meaning background gradient to top, and it does this for me. It's an abstraction on this. I don't need to know that. And there's pros and cons, but do the math with me. If I have a class name that tells it what to do declaratively, I'm less writing like error-prone, maybe outdated CSS, and Tailwind will translate this to the right CSS for me. That is also a massive, massive win. So, two strengths. To give you a balanced perspective, I'd like to offer two weaknesses that I notice. One is Tailwind gets really long really easily, and there's no good support for like multi-line formatting. So what you end up with is just long chains of class names. It's a little bit hard. Also, conditional logic is not as good as like CSS and JS with Tailwind. For example, if we wanted to say, is a random heads or tails blue or red, like we do it like this, conditional logic in CSS, we'd use something called CLSX to kind of collate class names for us, right? And what we do is we'd say, if, let's say here, const random, we'll do this math.random, and we'll say, actually, that's actually good. So we'll say random, if it's, greater than 50%, we'll do background. This is the background. Otherwise, we'll do the same background, but instead blue. Gosh, look, it's getting hard already. And this is exactly what I'm trying to highlight, is the weakness of Tailwind. Okay, so we have that, and then this background gradient is not really related to the ternary operation, so we'll do it like this here. And you can kind of see how it gets a little bit unwieldy. Okay, so we have a ternary where if our random is more than 0.5, red, if it's less than 0.5, blue, and some miscellaneous stuff. And so if we come here to the browser, reload that, 50% of the time we're going to get red, 50% of the time we're going to get blue. See? And yeah, but look at this code. Now this would be way better with CSS and JS. And if you want a video on CSS and JS, let me know in the comments. I'll make one. But it's hard. Multi-line support, conditional logic is pretty hard. There is a Visual Studio Code plugin that will at least enforce like the same order of class names. So you have like flex in the same space in your string every time, but not the best. Not the best, especially compared to CSS and JS, right? Where you have the full support of JavaScript, multi-line, whatever you want, conditionals, everything just there. So not the best, but CSS and JS does enable you to ship the same rule, display flex, multiple times. So who bears the cost of this negative is really us developers, while our users still get less CSS and faster things. So I think this negative isn't that much of a negative. Negative number two is it kind of makes the platform obscure. I said it's positive that it's an abstraction, but it's also negative that it's an abstraction, because what I predict, unfortunately, is we'll see a lot of people get into web development with Tailwind, not learning the fundamentals, aka CSS, which can be a problem because the real transferable skill is CSS. There's way more jobs that require CSS than Tailwind at this point, and maybe that'll flip, maybe it won't, but I feel like you really get the most out of something when you know CSS, the actual language and specification. So it might keep people from learning CSS. I think that's a problem because I do think CSS is what Tailwind is built on. Therefore, it's kind of like learning React instead of JavaScript. You're limiting yourself, and I think Tailwind presents that opportunity. Now, I want to talk to you about the mixed thing. I'm not really sure how I feel about this, because it's purely a developer experience thing, and that is type safety. Type safety. TypeScript is all the rage, right? Shout out T3 Stack, Theo. But type safety is complicated because there is type safety to a degree and auto completion, but there also isn't. Let me show you. So if I come here, right, and I want to do literally anything, I pull up IntelliSense. Look at this, I have it. And if I want to do like padding, top, look, and it even shows me, look at that, that's awesome, right? So I have that auto completion, but I don't have this. It just tells me pet9 is fine, and it's true. I could have pet9 defined somewhere else, so it can't tell me it's wrong. And also that auto completion and relative type safety thing you saw, which there's actually more. So if I If I go here and do grid flex, something nonsensical, it will warn me. You can't do both, right? So that's pretty nice, but all of that exists just in my browser. It will not be caught at build time. There just isn't like compiler level support for that yet, type safety. Whereas again, if you compare with CSS and JS, CSS and TS, right? You get all the benefits of TypeScript already. So there is a plugin, by the way, what I showed you was from the Tailwind CSS VS Code plugin. There's a plugin, it's not complete, so I'm not really sure how I feel about it. That's on the developer experience side. I want to be very clear though, in conclusion and summary, we're kind of done, is Tailwind is a general net positive boon for your end user, I'm pretty sure. Because again, you ship less stuff. You ship scalable stuff. It's less likelihood of things breaking. Your end user wins when you use Tailwind, even if your developer experience is not one you prefer. Versus all of the pain I've heard around Tailwind is literally developer experience. When, to be honest, yes, happy developers mean happy users, but really users pay your ad bills and others, right? So I think if I was to choose between CSS, handwritten, or Tailwind for the benefit of my users, potential customers, I would choose Tailwind because it's safer and smaller by design. It sets you up to fall into the pit of success. Okay. Um, in closing, I was asked how this compares to Chakra UI, and my answer is it doesn't. Chakra UI is a UI library. In case you don't know, I'll put a link under the like button, but it doesn't because Tailwind is an atomic CSS generator. Chakra UI is a UI library, sometimes a UI library of components. It's an apples to oranges comparison. It's an apples to polar bears comparison. They're just different things. But you can use Tailwind to build something like Chakra UI. Or, you can use Tailwind to build Bootstrap, etc., because it generates CSS for you. And that's kind of how it compares or how it fits in the landscape. Anyway, I've talked too much. What do you think? Am I off the rails? Am I on the money? Tell me. Leave a comment below or at me on Twitter. But for now, that's been it. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one. Peace.